Okay, Tara, I have a question for you. Why didn't the skeleton get a prom date? And before you answer, let me just tell you that this has everything to do with today's topic. Now go.
Why didn't the skeleton get a prom date? I can't even begin.
Because he didn't have the guts to ask.
Oh, outstanding.
Good morning, everybody. Good morning. My daughter, when she was very little, I used to sing songs to her to wake her up, and she's like, no, just no, stop it. So some of you may like it, some of you may not. We're trying different things down here at the Daily Huddle. Welcome to Spiritual Matters Thursday. I am your host, Dr. Monikah Ogando, and I am delighted to be here with you because we have a very, very good question. Perhaps the one that we should have started the year with, which is, how do I begin my spiritual journey? As always, it's gonna get juicy. It's gonna get juicy. And you know I'm gonna get in your Kool-Aid. But before we do that, I want to ask some questions to kind of prime us and get us into the present moment. So Andrea, how are you?
Monikah, I am the way I say I am, and today I'm courageous. Feeling courageous.
I like that. Okay, I like courageous. I'm gonna adopt that one too. Sorrel, where are you and what are you grateful for?
I am right here. And I'm grateful for coffee.
Amen, brother. Amen. We are all grateful for coffee. Yes. All right. Gio, what time is it? And who are you hugging today?
The time, hold on a second.
But
Now, the time is now.
Yes.
And today I'm going to be hugging my client.
Oh, I love that about you. I love that you hug your clients. It's awesome. Well, I am so delighted to have everyone here with us today. And I wanted to start the conversation, of course, where I always start conversations, which is check your assumptions, right? So when I say, where do I begin my spiritual journey? Let's establish some givens, kind of like a geometry theorem, in class. I don't know if you ever took geometry when you were in high school or whatever. I still have trauma bond with geometry because of that. And one of the things that I remember from those classes was that you had some givens so that then you can prove the theorem. And when I ask the question, where do I begin my spiritual journey? It assumes what? What do you think it assumes? Tell me in the chat. It assumes that like you haven't begun it, for example. And one of the things that I know for sure in this dual universe of the spiritual and the material, the up and the down, the left and the right, etc., is that you're always in a process of becoming. Like as soon as you became a blip of existence, you are in the process of becoming. And that doesn't stop. That doesn't even stop after you leave. Can you believe that? It doesn't even stop after you leave. Because even after you leave, like my father, for example, transitioned last year, but even though he's no longer physically with us, he's still becoming in the way that we remember him, in the way that we talk about him, in the way that we celebrate him, in the way that we grieve him, in the way that we laugh about crazy stuff that we are now discovering he's done with his financials and with, the stuff that he's left behind. Like, oh, okay, Raphael Ogando is still, wreaking havoc. And so with your spiritual journey, you want to ask yourself some questions. And I'm always going to give you more questions than I'm going to give you answers. That's just going to be, we're just going to have to agree that that's the nature of our relationship. And so I want you to start asking yourself some questions like, for example, why does this matter to me? Why is it important for you to be clear about your spiritual journey, let alone how to begin it or how to continue it or how to take it to the next level, etc. It's important that you get clear for yourself about why something matters to you, because then you can stand in your conviction, you can stand in your commitment for something. If it is not important to you, then you don't spend time, energy, attention on it, etc. Right? And then I want you to ask a second question. And the second question is this. It's important. What pain will having an answer to this question help me solve? What pain will having an answer to this question help me solve? Here's what I mean by that. For some people, we sometimes do not have answers to really unfair, unexpected things that are beyond our control. And one of the ways that we justify it or explain it away is by assigning control or power or blame or fault to an outside, external, spiritual, divine being. And then the spiritual journey becomes, how do I navigate this capricious God so that I can avoid the most amount of pain and get the most amount of success or pleasure or significance in my life? If we're honest, sometimes that's the bottom line of it, right? And so you want to ask yourself, what is the pain that I'm trying to solve by asking this question, this or any question for that matter. And then the third thing, and here's a juicy one, I told you it's going to get juicy. A third question that I would ask, what am I pretending not to know about this? And the reason I ask that question, sometimes when I'm coaching clients or sometimes when I'm in front of a speaking, I speak to audiences and so forth, and I ask that question, is because in this culture, we sometimes ignore or minimize our intuition or our inner knowing about certain things, our hunches. You sometimes have I don't know, we'll call it like, I don't know how I know this to be true, I just know that it is kind of thing. And we ignore it for the sake of accepted social norms, cultural norms, or traditions in your family, or traditions in your spiritual tradition, et cetera, at the expense of something that resonates with you. I'm not saying either or. I know I began the conversation talking about the dual nature of our universe. I'm not saying either or, I'm saying stand for the and, right? You've heard me say that hashtag, stand for the and. And so what I mean by that is all of the things that make up your personality, who you were born to in terms of like your individual family, your mother, your father, your family, but also the country you were born, the culture, the race, the gender, all of the pieces that make up your specific biography. And then you have the stories, the pivot points that make up your biography. And some of them are positive pivot points. Some of them you may consider traumatic or painful. For example, my sister or my brother being born, I wouldn't consider that necessarily bad. It depends on the day, right? But I would call it a pivot point, right? Because I'm the oldest. And so whenever another child gets born into the family, obviously the family dynamics shift, right? And that's part of your biography. So then there's this piece that's like this hunger or this curiosity or this kind of like empty seat at the table of my consciousness where my relationship to the divine gets to sit. and then I invite those questions, or I invite the research, or I invite the rituals. And sometimes one of the ways to begin a heightened awareness of your own spiritual journey, because it's not like you began the journey, but now perhaps you've begun to be more aware of it, is to participate in some self-designed rituals. What do I mean by that? For example, some of us journal. on a day-to-day basis or on a regular basis. Maybe it's not every day, but regular enough. Some of us work out on our bodies. Some of us do hypnosis or meditation or visualizations or affirmations. All of these things, if you're familiar with the chakras, sometimes you may have heard me speak about chakras before. You have 4 lower bodies. You have the physical, the emotional, the mental, and then the intellectual, spiritual. And so when you handle all 4 of those things, like the physical could be about your food and about your rest. Dancing even can be a ritual. Your emotional can be about meditation or, catharting your emotions, etc. And then your mental could be about like journaling or, visualization and creating thought forms that produce the results that you say that you want. So when you put these rituals together, you start to kind of like create your own ingredients for what makes this spiritual journey yours. And here's what I know from experience in my life is that what's meant for you, you won't miss it. And if it isn't meant for you, even out of season, you won't catch it. Right? There have been times when I have shared things with someone or a client or with somebody in my family, etc. And as much as I thought that this person needed to know that and needed to, capture this lesson and needed to be able to implement this, and listen, if they're not there, they're not there. And sometimes it may take a week, it may take months, it may take years, it may take a tragedy, it may take just some time. I remember a mentor of mine said, it takes 40 years to be a 40-year-old. Like, you can't rush that, right? And so for you in your spiritual journey, I think if you start with those questions that have been so helpful for me, and if you start putting together some form of like your ingredients for what makes your day-to-day rituals begin to have a level of intentionality, of deliberate creation, of presence, of connection to the divine, whatever you call that, God, Allah, Buddha, intelligence, universal love, whatever you call it. When you start to ritualize that presence, then you'll start to notice that certain avenues open up that perhaps you were not aware about them before. So I'm very curious what questions, what comments, what ahas, what devil advocate commentary we have in the audience. I don't see anything in the chat yet, but I'm going to open it up because I love talking to you. So I'm going to open it up so we can have some dialogue about it. Who wants to? Ooh, Tara, come on in.
Yes. I just love your wisdom, but I also find it to be very accepting and open. Like, it's not like this is the way. And for me, as I listen to you talking about starting a spiritual journey and the purpose of it and all the different ways that it can manifest, I find this to be very freeing. And to me, that the ability to be free in this world, there's so many ways to define it. But I've really been leaning into it lately, and this just really elevates it. So I don't know that I have a question. This gives me a lot of thinking, especially about how much I treasure freedom and what it means and how much more spiritual I can be without guidelines. So I just really want to say thank you.
Oh, thank you, Tara. That's awesome. Thank you. Who else has comment or yes, Darrell?
Yeah, I too, like Tara, love the freedom that the questions provide. And in particular, the first question, why does this matter to me? And I'm finding that even not answering that question gives me a lot of freedom. So it's like, well, it doesn't have to matter to me. I'm just on the journey, and perhaps there's no end to the journey itself. So I'm finding a lot of freedom in not boxing myself up with an answer to that question. Why am I on this journey? And if it is for X, Y, Z, then my human brain gets disappointed, gets impatient when X, Y, Z is not coming as quickly as I want it to, right? So yeah, I'm loving questions.
You bring up something. I don't know what happened to my camera here. You bring up something very interesting to me, and that is that you said about, if it's not coming, then I get kind of antsy about it. And I want to present a distinction between intention and attachment, because sometimes we have an intention. For example, when you get in the car, you have a destination that you want to get to, right? It's like, okay, if I'm getting in the car and I'm going to the supermarket, right? Or I'm going to the car and I'm going to the gym, Lord have mercy. But before you get to the gym, there's an ice cream store, there's a supermarket, there's a whole bunch of places that you'd rather be than the gym. And sometimes it might take you a little bit longer because of traffic, because there's some construction happening that you weren't aware of, et cetera. So it takes you a minute to get to the gym, but you're still intentional about your direction. Whereas if you were like, no, it's supposed to be the gym and it's supposed to be the one on such and such street, and it's supposed to be at 10 o'clock. And if it's not that, then And so that attachment and that kind of like nervousness that we get when it doesn't happen in the way we want it or in the deadline that we want it, that self-inflicted suffering can be avoided when we stay on our intention and then let the result come as it may, because there may be magic there that we may not be aware of. Just something that I wanted to kind of presence to see if it resonates.
And thank you. I'm now left intrigued with this question, Dr. Ogando. You like saying it's like geometry, what are my assumptions? How am I going to prove the theorem?
Mhm.
The question I have is, how would you qualify what the spiritual journey is for a human being?
Say more about that. What do you mean?
What is it to be on a spiritual journey?
Mm-hmm. I think it always has a tone of figuring out or being present to who am I, and in relationship to myself, in relationship to the divine, and what am I supposed to be doing here in this world. So it's a little bit about intention, but also about impact. I think it forces us, or it invites us. It doesn't force us. My experience of spirit is never forceful. But it invites us to have the conversation of like, who do you say that you are? And in most of the spiritual traditions, like Jesus asked Peter that, Buddha spent years asking the question, who am I? And so, most all spiritual traditions, there's a question of, who do I say that I am? And what does that mean for how I navigate the world? What does that mean in relationship to what somebody else is? And then out of that, then you begin to have these questions like, what does it mean to be good? What does it mean to be evil? What does it mean to have justice? What does it mean to, be a good person? And all these other corollary questions that come out of who I am. Who am I? And I think that being in that investigation is the spiritual journey. That's what I'm going to say about that.
Yeah, thank you. And that's very distinct from the way I was raised. I was raised Catholic,
Mm-hmm.
and then I loved what my grandmother practiced. She used to go to a church where they had all sorts of musical instruments, and they'd let the children play with them. While the adults were singing, I could play with the instruments. So I went there too. It was a Protestant church. But what was always there for me as the journey is, how obedient could I be to the rules and regulations of said sect or religion or group of people?
Mm-hmm.
And back to what Tara was pointing to, that always felt so hard for me. And I'd give up, start again, give up, start again. And in this conversation, I'm discovering that really had nothing to do with my journey at all. It had all to do with how good I thought I was doing following the rules.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And then at some point in time, I just said, oh, well, I'm grown up now. I don't have to follow any rules.
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
I left. So this is opening up the possibility for me of being on a journey for the sake of being on the journey. So thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to say something else about that. And it's, you know how you can recognize a human being physically by the way that we are anatomically put together, right? Like the head sits here. You'll never find a human being with the head by the feet, right? The head sits here by the shoulders. If you're full bodied, right, then you have two eyes, you have a nose with two nostrils, you have a lips, you have ears, you have, hands, etc. There's a way that a human being is composed physically. Now, there may be things that change, like my nose is different than your nose. Your facial hair is different than mine. Mine is like peach fuzz more so, right? And so there's some differences and there's some customization, but for the most part, this is what a human being looks like. And in the same way, if you can imagine, what does a human being look like at the soul level, at the consciousness level, then there are some pieces that are also commonality, and they may be different depending on who you are specifically, but for the most part, it's formulaic. And I'm going to suggest that you look into, not you, Sorrel, but everybody here in our daily huddle community, that you look into the hero's journey. The hero's journey has 12 phases in that particular path. And if you'll notice, almost every single action movie, listen, even Disney, even The Lion King, every movie follows this particular formula. And then I want you to think about, where am I in my hero's journey? Because what you're talking about, Sorrel, and I'll get to your question in a minute, Stan, what you're talking about is, at the beginning of the hero's journey, things are kind of like normal, and it's just like this regular world, just kind of moving along. And then there's an inciting event, something that triggers a movement. And it might be trauma, it may be disappointment, it might be somebody, that you put up on a pedestal, all of a sudden isn't who you thought they were, or whatever, right? And so that inciting event then begins the quest for, independence, like you said, or freedom, like Tara said. And whatever that thing is, that holy grail, where it be freedom or authenticity or whatever the thing may be, is what impels us to move through all those 12 phases of the hero's journey. Eventually, there's a battle that we call the dark night of the soul, where you lose everything or you question everything, and you're like, I got answers and I don't know that I want to find out. And then you have to kind of wrestle. In the Bible, there's a scene where Jacob fights with the angel and says, I will not let you go until you bless me. Jacob or Isaac, I forget which one it is. And so then when you have that dark night of the soul and you come out of that, then it's like, not only am I equipped, but now I can leave breadcrumbs for those who come before me or who come after me. And then you begin another hero's quest. Because now it may not necessarily be about survival, it may not be about success. Now maybe about significance, or maybe about legacy, or whatever the case may be. But I invite everybody to look into the hero's journey and see for yourself, where am I in my own hero's journey? Stan, come on in, brother.
Hey, Doc. Hey, I thank you so much for this discussion. I was just thinking about how Lizeth commented in the chat, and she said sometimes we believe, because our culture or family upbringing, that spirituality is something specific like a religion.
Mm-hmm.
How do you get away from those ideas to find your own spiritual journey? And that made me think, because I think that a spiritual journey is a very personal one.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't necessarily, you can't say that it's unrelated to what you may have learned and already been conditioned to or birthed into believing.
Mm-hmm.
It may be, that might have been what precipitated you going on your spiritual journey, possibly. I don't know, that kind of question. But it's a very personal thing to me, a spiritual journey that has nothing to do with formal education, really, or anything. It's like, why am I here?
Mm-hmm.
What is my purpose in this life? You touched on it. You said it already. And I think that's what a spiritual journey is really all about. It's if you never had an ounce of formal education, if you never heard anything about a religion or anything like that, I think we would still have those questions. Why am I here? What is my purpose? And I think that's what a spiritual journey. What am I supposed to bring to life? And what did life bring me here to do?
Yeah. That's awesome. Thank you so much for bringing that. And Lisette, what I'll say to that too is that sometimes I hear the conversation underneath the conversation. And in a question like, how do I get away from those ideas to find your own spiritual journey? What I hear underneath it is, without sacrificing my relationships to my family, without getting people in my butt about, why are you doing this? And you're not supposed to, blah, 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 right? And so is that kind of like, blink, if that's what you mean. So if that's what's underneath that conversation, here's what I'll say to that. And that is, in almost every single growth period that we have, there's some perturbation. Even if it's something as innocent as like the baby's now walking, or the walking baby, the toddler is now in school, or now they're in school, but now they're in high school, or now they're in high school and now they have their own driver's license. Oh Lord. Or they graduated and they're moving away from home. So even in that little innocent like rites of passage that we have, parents struggle. I know I did. I was like, oh my God, my baby's growing up, but can't you just stay 4 forever, you know? And we got to give each other grace for that, right? There was a time when our spiritual, or our religion, like you said, like our religious identity gave us a sense of safety, gave us a sense of identity, gave us a sense of community. And when someone says, yeah, but I'm going to go find something else, you're perturbing the sense of community, you're perturbing the sense of unity. And that can be scary for some people. So when they lash out against you, for example, it's not that they're lashing out against you, they're lashing out about the fear of like, what am I losing? And if we can just be present to that, and we can be graceful with people about that, and patient with them on that, as you're finding your own place, then I think both of them can occur at the same time, that you can still identify with your family or with your culture or with your religion of origin. Like Sorrel and I were both raised Catholic, and now have our own spiritual identity, in the sense that, you know, it doesn't look anything like Catholicism, but it doesn't exclude it either. Does that make sense? Yeah, good stuff. Thank you, Cece. I see your comment in the chat. Thank you. All right, so do we have any more questions, comments, aha moments? You want to leave me with a funny quote or a joke or something before we wrap up? Because this was a juicy conversation. I told you it was gonna be juicy. Andrea's over there grinning. Cece's over there grinning.
You have like 2 minutes, and I don't know if this question might be big for the 2 minutes, but I always end up making this about you, but I just can't help it. I would love to know just a little bit of how you were raised in such a rigid setting. Yeah. And you have your own personal religious belief, but you have this beautiful, open, generous spirit to welcome all perspectives as it relates to spirituality. So in 1 minute, can you answer that question?
Tara with the impossible task.
Very inspiring.
Well, let me say this. My parents were always very accepting of us as the children, right? I almost get the sense that they were like fascinated. It's like, oh my God, how can you be so smart? How can you be so curious? How can you ask these questions? You know, but it wasn't out of fear. It was more like out of fascination. And when I was growing up, I saw how my parents were different with different people. And sometimes they will say one thing to some person and then something else to somebody else. I'm like, oh, my mama's a liar, you know? And so the hypocrisy of adults and the double standards and all of that, it didn't like flatten me. It liberated me. It was like, oh, these people don't know what they're doing either. Okay, let me go find out for myself then. You know what I mean? Because like they're growing up just like everybody else is growing up. All right, great. Let me find my answers then. You know what I mean? Without looking to somebody else for them.
That's a fantastic response. I'll never forget that. Very cool. So that was the impetus. I love it.
Yeah. Thank you for asking that. That's awesome.
Well, this has been fascinating. So
Thank you all of you for being here. I love spending my Thursday mornings with you, seeing your smiling faces, Sorrel, Andrea, Stan, Lisette, Tara, Cece, Giovanni's over there too, hanging out. And so I want to leave you with a couple of things. One, Remember the questions that I gave you. 2, create your own ritual recipe for the things that support you in feeling connected and feeling aligned and grounded and present. And 3, never stop asking questions. Never stop checking your assumptions. When you continue to check your assumptions, I'm telling you, man, it's better to check yourself before you wreck yourself. I'm just always going to say that. So thank you so much for being here with us on the Daily Huddle. Remember, of course, the 7 things to be sexy, have a great skin, and be an amazing person. Love always, stress less, laugh out loud, eat more plant-based foods, give of yourself and give of yourself. I always say, when in doubt, focus out. Whenever you're sad and in that moment, like, when you focus on another person and you get out of yourself, immediately your mood improves. And then finally, move at least 20 minutes a day. If you're like me, it'll include some dancing and some other stuff. I'm gonna let you guess what that is, but move at least 20 minutes a day so you can have some joy in your life. Thank you so much for being with us. I'll talk to you soon.
Thank you so much, Monica. See you later.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Doc. Thank you, everyone.